We started spending a bunch of time just kind of whiteboarding out how is this going to work, arguing about, the details of what would and wouldn't make sense, and, how could we collect enough data and all that kind of stuff. Going on the roof of the parking garage and flying drones and stuff like that. And then he left me and he reached out one day and said, hey, I've got this idea. I'm going to be back in town. This was like January of 2020, so right before COVID hit. I've got this idea I want to show it to you. We met at a coffee shop, the very earliest prototypes of gone through dozens of prototypes on his own, but this was a model of what he wanted to build, and the idea kind of struck me as a no-brainer.
And I'm working at Magic Leap, which has these augmented reality glasses, and I load up the model of this thing I want to build, which I have not built at full scale, but you just blow it up to full scale, and I throw it in the middle of the coffee shop, and I go, Dylan, put this headset on. This is his first time in a Magic Leap headset, because no one had seen it much before then. And in the middle of this coffee shop, you could still see the coffee shop around you, but then...
Welcome to Funds and Founders. This weekly show is tailored for Austin founders navigating the early stages of their entrepreneurial journey. I'm your host and fellow Austinite, Abhinav Sinha. If you're looking for the motivation and the insight needed to build a successful company, you're in the right place. Today we have on Ben and Dylan from Tubular Networks. Ben has an extensive career as a product management and product leader at companies like National Instruments, VRBO, Magic Leap, and most recently the co-founder and COO of Tubular Networks. Dylan is an engineering leader and has been at various companies like Expedia, HomeAway, and MapMyFitness. And you're now the co-founder and CTO of Tubular Networks. Welcome to the show, guys. One thing I wanted to ask you was, how did you guys first meet and decide to start the company together? And the reason I want to ask is, co-founder conflict is one of the biggest reasons for failures of a startup. And so choosing a co-founder is one of the most important and pivotal decisions someone has to make before starting a company. So let's just talk through that, and how did that dynamic happen between you guys?
I like Dylan's version of the story.
It's actually two different stories. So I'll start with how we met. We both were working for HomeAway / VRBO / Expedia, and somewhere in the acquisition process there. And I was heading up our experimentation platform team. So essentially at these big web application companies, you do a lot of changes, and in order to understand what has a positive impact on your business, you do these A/B tests, right? And so we built kind of the platform. We were sort of the source of truth to make sure that real science was happening, and it wasn't just product managers and analysts cherry picking the best results and saying, hey, our feature's great. Ben had a really challenging experiment that he wanted to run on a product that he was bringing into this world, kind of its own little startup within the company. And so we started spending a bunch of time just kind of whiteboarding out, how is this going to work? Arguing about, the details of what would and wouldn't make sense, and, how could we collect enough data and all that kind of stuff.
What's a clean test?
Yeah, what's a clean test versus, where would we be kind of muddying the waters? And then, going on the roof of the parking garage and flying drones and stuff like that, and just hanging out and got to be buddies. And then he left me. He went on to do something else. We had stayed in touch and chatted now and then, and he reached out one day and said, hey, I've got this idea. I'm going to be back in town. This was like January of 2020, so right before COVID hit. I've got this idea. I want to show it to you. We met at a coffee shop. It was the very earliest prototypes of, well, I shouldn't say earliest. Ben had been at it for about 9 months, I think, at that point. Gone through dozens of prototypes on his own, but this was a model of what he wanted to build and the idea. And it just kind of struck me as a no-brainer. And so at first it was just like, hey, I've got some engineering questions. Can you help me out? I said, sure.
You're forgetting the best part of the story.
You tell the best part of the story, because I have a different perspective on the best part of the story, but go ahead.
So this is at Houndstooth in the domain off the Rock Rose. And I'm working at Magic Leap, which has these augmented reality glasses, and I load up the model of this thing I want to build, which I have not built at full scale, but you just blow it up to full scale. And I throw it in the middle of the coffee shop, and I go, Dylan, put this headset on. This is his first time in a Magic Leap headset, because no one had seen it much before then. And in the middle of this coffee shop, you could still see the coffee shop around you, but then there's this giant tube with robotic shuttles, one hanging from the ceiling and one on the floor. And I'm sitting there explaining it, and he's sitting there looking at it. We're both looking like crazy people, and all these folks are drinking their coffees going, what are they seeing? These guys are nuts.
My perspective on that part of the story is I didn't feel like a crazy person because from my perspective, I was staring at this giant model and it made perfect sense. Honestly,
you were immersed in the model.
Exactly. It wasn't until later, I think like one of the first times we told this story where Ben was like, oh, we looked like crazy people. I was like, oh, I never even thought about that fact. Like that didn't even hit me. Like it just seemed so natural and, good job, I guess, to Magic Leap for creating that immersive experience. But yeah, so it was about 6 months later that Ben asked me to join as co-founder and if I'd be willing to kind of set out and try to make this a real thing. And I guess it was about 18 months after that we quit our full-time jobs and did it for real.
Yeah, we had to get validation that we knew the technology was amazing. We knew there was a long-term future, but we had to get validation there was a path forward. So we got a first customer, of which we can't specify who that is, but we can kind of talk about that experience of getting the first customer. And it was once we got the first customer and they said, okay, we're ready. We know where we want you to put the tube, install the tube. We started building the prototypes bigger and bigger until it was full scale. And then when we raised our first round, we were like, oh, we better quit our day jobs. Like, this is getting pretty serious. Yeah. So it was while fundraising our first round, we quit our day jobs. Yeah,
so
pursued it.
Quickly taking a step back, can we quickly describe for the audience what Tubular Network does and what you're trying to build out? What's the mission statement and where you currently guys are at?
Gotcha. So put simply, Tubular Network is robotic delivery inside tubes, sometimes underground. So the idea is to build a city-scale infrastructure in which you order something, 5 minutes later it shows up. So these robotic shuttles, they are driven by AI, they talk to each other, they're autonomous throughout the system, and they can climb vertically, which I think is probably the most rad feature because now you're not thinking two-dimensionally anymore. You're able to go from underground to ground level to the 30th floor of an apartment building, and they can handle anything with a flat bottom. So boxes, totes, a laptop, a phone, we've delivered it all. Some pretty big aerospace parts. It's been pretty wild what we've been able to deliver. But anyway, that's what Tubular Network is. The vision is that citywide delivery network to make things 10 times faster, 10 times cheaper, zero carbon emissions. And the mission is to decarbonize the transportation of goods.
Got it. And so quickly taking a step back, you mentioned you had to validate the idea before you guys went full-time, right? How do you sell a vision, a prototype, an idea without even having built any of this? Because like I come from a SaaS background. It's very easy to prototype SaaS and be like, hey, look, here this works, right? What you guys are talking about is, at least in my understanding, very difficult to like make a test model and be like, hey, look, this works, right? So how do you guys go about validating your idea and selling this vision to someone before even diving into building it out?
You got to do something similar to software like SaaS companies. You got to figure out a way to show it before you build it. And big shout out to Dylan. One time I handed him a VR headset. I think it was a MetaQuest 2. I said, you ever made a VR app? He said, no. I said, okay, on top of everything you're doing, like make this VR experience because we want to put it on people's heads and show them what this looks like. And a video outtake of that is what we showed to the first customer that got them bought in and said, yeah, that's what I want to do. And then later we hired someone even better at visuals than Dylan to make a VR experience.
That group wasn't hard.
called a Raconteur Animation. So they're phenomenal at telling visual stories.
Got it.
So specifically for any hardware companies, finding an animation group, a visualization group, super handy in order to sell what doesn't exist yet.
I'll also say it took maybe talking to 100 or 150 potential customers. That journey of getting to that point where we actually found someone that had the right problem and said yes, it took work. It took a good chunk of that time before we quit our day jobs. A lot of what we were doing, other than putting the tech together and trying to get something that actually looked like what we claimed, was talking to people. It's just every conversation you can find and then asking that person for 2 introductions. The modern day equivalent of going door to door, right? You're just knocking on every door you can find and ask a question. I mean, we started out talking to people in agriculture,
mining.
Like we ended up now we're back to talking to people about mining, but yeah, I mean, just we conceptually knew that we wanted to move stuff. And we knew that there were a lot of places in the human ecosystem that stuff moved, but finding the right we didn't settle on kind of focusing on the manufacturing market until, I don't know, maybe like a year and a half ago. I mean, we had our customer was in the manufacturing space. We actually kind of like e-commerce would be the first place because there's so much stuff that moves in e-commerce, but we've found this kind of niche in manufacturing that's been a good toehold for us to start exploring.
How do you not get lost in this sea of options? I'm guessing most of your potential calls are with B2B prospects, right? But like you said, there's endless opportunity. How are you splitting your time between having sales calls, talking to the right person, understanding what is of value, going deeper, asking for intros versus saying, hey, this is not the right space, but also balancing, hey, I still got to, make progress on the prototype, the product, whatever you're working on. And I think at this point, you guys still have 9-to-5 jobs, right?
Well, yeah, before we quit our full-time jobs, I don't know that there was a formula. I think a lot of it was just aggressively going after everything that came at you and probably working ourselves harder than we should have, for our own health. I think since we've sort of quit our full-time jobs and made this into I'll put real in quotation marks, but a real business, that problem hasn't gone away.
Makes sense.
In fact, in a lot of ways, I would say that question is one of the fundamental pieces of what makes being a startup founder really hard. Every day you show up and you have to decide what's the most important thing today. And maybe not every day, but a lot of days, that's like an existential decision
100%.
For the company.
Yeah.
100%. You are doing these sales calls. You land your first customer. Is it an LOI? Is it like a signed agreement? Is it a check? In what capacity did you guys sign your first customer?
So in the first 7 minutes of our first call with this customer, which time check, I think is less than we've been talking.
Yeah.
They said, we know where we want to pilot this. How soon can you build the tube? And mind you, at that point, we had a little prototype that was about the size of an iPhone and a VR concept. It took us, I think, 1.5 years or 2 years to actually build it there.
And they stuck with us that whole time.
That whole time at this same location, that's where we're moving aerospace parts today. It's wild. It's really cool. But it took us, must have been 1 year to get a letter of intent. This is a particularly large aerospace company. And so getting anything signed, even if it is a legally non-binding letter of intent, took forever.
So much red lines.
So many red lines. And we eventually got the LOI. I think while we had started construction, got a purchase order. Like it was, the purchase order kicked off construction.
The purchase order,
but it was close.
Yeah.
And the I'm not a legal aficionado, but an LOI is not an intent to, hey, I'm going to buy whatever product you're selling, right? An LOI is more.
It's not a contractually binding. Yeah.
It's more like, hey, I'm interested. This means that I'm most likely gonna go through with this, but
it's
still a chance that I back out, right?
Exactly. It's a document that says, if this product existed at this price, we would probably buy it.
Makes sense. But that was enough signal for you guys to take the plunge, go raise, and start, mapping out that path to building.
I think the letter of intent really was for a little bit of confidence as us as a business to go build it, but primarily for fundraising. Like the investors want to see they've at least signed a piece of paper, even if it is contractually worthless.
Yeah.
They've signed a piece of paper that says they're committed at this much setup fee and this much revenue. I think based on a relationship with that customer, we probably would have built it without an LOI, but
potentially.
But the LOI does help. And as a business, it helps us to start to think, okay, what does a contract look like? What are terms? Who gets what? What are the benefits? Anybody starting a company, especially in hardware, I would recommend do a letter of intent, start to figure out what those terms, what your business model looks like, get a customer to sign that, because it won't happen the first time. You'll learn a lot in terms of what they can and cannot do that are surprising. It's by the time you really need a good contract that your whole company depends on, you've been through it a few times. It's kind of like my advice for dating. You don't want the date that really matters to be your first date ever. And
I'm assuming with hardware like contracts, there's a lot of other formalities. Like there's going to be build costs, operational costs. There's going to be labor cost outside of whatever monthly model you guys are on. I don't know how Tubular is structured in terms of business model, and then there's going to be maintenance versus on the SaaS side, it's a monthly subscription or an annual subscription or a per user. Like there's not a lot of variables there.
Sure.
But I'm assuming on the hardware software side, there's a lot that you guys had to figure out on that front.
And still are.
Yeah. I mean, it's always an evolving thing, I think. The other thing about coming into the industrial space is that in SaaS, a lot of your sales are B2B, but you can do a lot of lead generation by just having like a landing page where someone gets signs up for the freemium service and, gets into your software and uses it, right? For us, we have to go in and pitch this thing to companies, a solution that to a problem that they have, but they've probably not really thought a lot about because they've just accepted it. Like, oh, this problem just exists. Like, there's no way around it. So we have to be like, no, there's a better way to do it. And then, they're like, cool, we'd love to talk to you. Here's our legal team. And so figuring out how to navigate all that and not be totally drowned just in like paying legal fees to get to the point where we could even get to signing a contract has been an interesting experience and definitely a learning one. Like, I know it's cliche. People say hardware's hard, but it is hard. There's a lot of elements to it that I hadn't thought of going into.
I was at a bigger company and we were signing a deal with an IDP. They wanted to get into the door. So it was a small deal, 30, 40K, the one that my team was signing. But our legal team drew it out to 11, 12 months. And the other side came back saying, we've lost money on this because our legal fees are now more than the actual contract value.
Yes.
But they wanted to get in the door because once you sign that MSA with the company, now any team within the company can now use that software.
Yep.
So they're trying to play the bigger picture, which I understand. But the fact that as a company who is always in that, I don't know what the right analogy is, but you're the one who wants the deal probably more than the other side. You're always going to be slightly strong-armed in situations you don't want to be.
Yeah. I would say that's particularly in business, any business-to-business startup, that's probably one of the toughest lines to walk is you may initially get interest from bigger companies that seem like a really great opportunity. And we're living this today, so this is not hypothetical. Those big companies, they're always looking for opportunities. And so they're willing to talk to you and they've got a lot of people and they've got they can take a year in legal and no one really cares. There's not someone watching the money burn, right?
Yeah.
And as the startup, knowing when to kind of cut ties and say, look, this is not for us right now. We need to go focus on selling 10 small contracts, even if they are never going to total what this could maybe total, in order to have that baseline, that bottom of the foundation, built up and a bunch of customers that you can kind of lose one here and there and it doesn't really matter and everything. Yeah, it's hard to walk away from those bigger customers in the early days, but I think it's important to keep them warm, keep the conversation going, but not put all your eggs in one or two baskets.
It's also, I think, very essential for founders to understand, hey, where is my time best utilized, right?
Yeah.
When you're early on, you don't have a 40-person legal team fighting 17 contracts and redlining every contract with every person. But I think it's very hard for founders to say no to a 6-7 figure contract versus, hey, let me go do 2-3 high 5-figure contracts that are probably going to sign within the next 2-3 weeks.
Yeah.
That's more actionable revenue, but it's sort of the light at the end of the tunnel where it's well, maybe they'll do it. Right.
We'd be made, right?
Yeah.
We just land that one contract and we'd be made. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard.
I think it takes a lot of maturity also to know what to say no to, know what to say yes to. Cause again, when you're early on and you haven't raised a $50 million round and you're not rolling around in VC money, you got to make a lot of very sound resourcing decisions, money decisions, allocation decisions. Every small decision has an impact down the line, right? So
it goes back to the beginning of this conversation, right? Those just every day you're waking up and you're making those decisions. What's the most important thing to focus on today? We have a small team, so as the leaders of the company and that team, we give people the opportunity to step up and execute and bring ideas and everything. But a lot of times they're looking to us to make that decision for the whole company.
Yeah.
And so it's not just one person you're making that decision for, right? You're kind of aligning everyone to a set of goals and getting them to execute on those goals. And you got to have a lot of conviction and kind of say it with eyes wide open that it may be wrong, but you're going to, everyone's got to walk in that same direction, row in that same direction. It's tough. I'd say it's one of the things that contributes most, at least personally for me, to kind of the weight and the burnout and everything, is just that like every decision is seemingly do or die.
Makes sense. Quick tangent outside of whatever I had prepared. Since you guys went full time, what's one highlight of the journey so far that sticks with you till today that you would be like, hey, that was like a really high point, or that's something that you just remember?
There have been a number of them, but the one that sticks out most to me was we signed this LOI, right? And we get this contract effectively to go and deliver this pilot system. At that point, the longest system we had ever built was a horseshoe. This system is 450 feet long. And it used a novel system for holding the tube up in the air. It had to interface with 2 different buildings, so like go through the wall of the buildings. And we hired a contractor, construction company, to come out and help us put it together and build it. But no one had ever built a system like this with the materials that we were doing it in the way that we were doing it. So everyone was kind of figuring it out on the fly. And there were so many times through that process where I was just like, this is just not going to work. Like, I just don't know how we're going to finish this. But the day that we finally punched holes through the wall and connected the tube to the building, and it was structurally done, we had 2 buildings connected by this big ass tube. That day really stands out to me. Like, that was the first time I knew kind of academically that we would finish it and we'd get there, but emotionally, that was like the first time that I was really dawned on me that we were really doing this. Like, we were really going to have these robots moving parts for this company, and pretty soon.
Nice. Any high point that stands out for you?
Oh, I've got so many. So I'll give you an anti-high point, which people would expect to be a high point, but wasn't. And then a couple of examples of that. Sometimes in startup world, you see people in the news or you see people up on stage getting awards and you think, wow, that's got to be the highlight. And we recently won a couple of awards from Austin Regional Manufacturing Association, which is this phenomenal community of manufacturers around here. And that was a precious, awesome moment. But what kicks that in the butt every time is like when you point your bat metaphorically and say, I'm going to hit it out there, and then somehow it connects and gets there. That's the highlight for every entrepreneur, somebody who's building something new and different.
100%.
And so, like, very similar to his, my highlight was that first delivery that went through that system. So not just the tube, but like the thing that we're actually doing is delivering. And I remember we put a box over here and we ran over to the other side and somebody sent it and it showed up on the other side and it wasn't mangled. It just calmly showed up.
Nice.
And it was like, whoa, this is going to work. I think this is totally nuts. And then the other highlight was when the team did a super outstanding job. So you always try to hire the best and the brightest, people you trust with the company, people you'd want to get a beer with. There's a lot that goes into choosing the team, especially when you don't have a lot of cash for headcount. Like every person, it feels like is an existential hire. And recently we welcomed our second kid, my wife and I, our second kid into the world. Yeah. Thank you. He's 7 weeks old yesterday. I stepped out for paternity leave, and it wasn't the 3 or 6 months I would have had at a tech job. It was about 5 or 6 weeks. And I looked at Dylan and I said, I want to take a paternity leave to really be a good dad and a good husband. And I think that the company is not going to crash and burn. I think you guys are going to do a good job. I stepped away and I was able to like put down my phone and not check on
no pings.
Like I didn't lose, not correct. A few pings.
I feel like it's also hard for an entrepreneur to completely shut off. Even if you have muted everything, you're going to go check every once in a while.
You can't stop thinking about it.
100%.
But when you can trust your team to handle it for a while, and then they do in a really big, awesome way, it opened up my mind of like, oh, okay, this company's reached a new level. I can chill out on trying to be doing everything. Obviously not doing everything, but I can work differently now.
Makes sense.
And that is really nice. So like weird advice for startup people, founders is like, take some time off, see how the team does without you. It might crash and burn. It might be better than if you were there, because in either way, you learn a lot during that. And just your ability to step away helps you not get burned out and gain a lot of perspective.
100%. It also tells you where you need to invest time.
Correct.
If something crashes and burns without you, that means there's something fundamentally wrong in your operation structure. But I think, like you said, it highlights a lot for the person. How has it been for you guys coming from traditional tech world? I know you had a mixed AR Magic Leap background, so slight foray into hardware, but building a hardware software startup, I feel like it's a very different path than building a SaaS company or just traditional software company. How do you guys challenge what you don't know? Because there's probably a lot that you don't know about building the sort of hardware software mix. You mentioned construction, you mentioned needing a contractor. How do you plan? You 3D modeled it too, but okay, you know nothing about punching a hole in a building, right? So how do you go about that? What are the skills you need? How do you figure that out? Is it hiring the right people? Is it you guys upskilling? What does that process and journey look like?
All of the above. I would say one of the skills that's super important to have in your team, and it doesn't actually necessarily need to be a founder, but you need to have at least one, maybe two people in your team who are comfortable learning enough to figure out how to do something. You have to be comfortable not knowing everything, but making decisions anyways, and sort of plotting a course half blind, but having enough confidence in being able to sort of pick it up as you go along that you can get to the other end. And this is, I'm going to sound full of myself. This is my superpower. Like I'm a decent leader. I'm a B+ engineer, but I can B+ engineering on just about anything.
Makes sense.
If I have enough time to just like sit down and focus on it and learn it. So like, going into Tubular, I had done a lot of on the side, like messing around with 3D printing and, 3D modeling and a little bit of mechanical engineering, done a fair bit of the electrical engineering, but I by no means ever built something as complex as the robots that we have today. And I haven't done it all on my own, right? We hired a great team that brought a lot of expertise from a lot of different places, mechanical engineering, robotics, software. But in those early days, being able to just say like, yeah, no one's ever figured out how to make this tube withstand 80 mile per hour winds. So how do you do that, right? Just go figure it out. We start calling people, you do some math, whatever it is. So yeah, it's as much as you can hire for your weaknesses.
Yeah.
But you just have to be comfortable just kind of winging it a little bit. And my approach is always to try to do something myself and then try to find someone who can check my work, basically. And if that person's conclusion is
similar,
right? Within 20% plus or minus of what I came up with, I go, all right, I think we're in the right ballpark. Let's keep going.
Makes sense.
From my perspective, the name of the game when it comes to building something new out of hardware is trying to reduce the cost of learning. And it's a very specific definition of that, so don't go too crazy. Specifically, like when we wanted to do a new mechanism, we could have gone and invented a new mechanism out of raw parts and built it ourselves, and it would have taken months and who knows?
Trial and error.
Yeah, and we would have gotten it wrong. Or we use like drawer slides from Lowe's as a sub part of the system, and that worked shockingly well for a number of months. And we thought those things were going to fail after a few days, and then they just kept working. And when we have a new geometry that we need to do, we 3D print it out of plastic, even though we know it's going to end up being metal because of how all the strains on it. Let's just try plastic. And we print that thing out in a matter of hours, and then it lasts a lot longer or breaks in a different way than we were anticipating, and we learn faster that way. So using off-the-shelf stuff not reinventing anything that we don't have to.
Yeah.
And then even though parts sound expensive, the largest cost of any startup is time.
100%.
So if you can get something off the shelf or abuse the way that something was designed to see if it works for yours, you learn faster, and then you can go design and invent the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, great example of
Still wrong, but closer to right.
great example of that is still today in our production system, we buy these cheap little bearings from Amazon that are pillow block bearings that are inside of a housing, and we just rip them out of the housing because it's like they haven't been the failure. They've never been the thing that failed. And so we can get them for like 90 cents a piece from Amazon. So why stop?
Makes sense.
First battery was a used battery off of a scooter that you rent downtown, because it was like $40 and did a pretty damn good job. And then we learned enough from that to realize what we needed out of a real battery. And so we went and designed that. And I'd say probably still redesign it many more times.
Oh yeah, for sure.
There's a word in Hindi called Jugaad.
Jugaad?
Yeah, which basically means, like, it's a big thing in India where you just figure shit out. So you'll see these cycle cart vendors selling fruit off their cycle cart, but they'll take an old scooter's motor, just attach it to the cycle and add the accelerator, and now they have a motorized cycle cart for like 1/100th the price of buying a motorized cycle cart or a motorcycle. And that whole idea of, oh, hey, I don't need to go the proper route. I can just like put 2 and 2 together. It does the same thing that I was going to do anyway for much less, and it's a much better solution. And that's a big thing you see in India, but like it's not as widely seen of a trait here in the US of like, if it's broken, you generally go buy the next thing. There's no like, oh, hey, let me tape it together and find a way to fix this.
Yeah.
In rural communities, I'd say there's more of that. Like I definitely came from a place where scrappiness was highly valued, but that's really cool. Jugaad, that's neat.
Yeah. But no, like I tell a lot of friends that the whole idea of putting something together for the sake of doing it as raw as possible to validate. There's also a little bit of an entrepreneur gets a little scared of like, is this the right thing for me to do? But again, it's part of the journey. That's not the final solution, like you guys said. It's okay to go down this path because it gets you to the end goal faster, or it helps you fail faster, which I think is a better use of resources than
absolutely.
Let me go down this whole path and then fail at the end versus, okay, didn't work. I got to pivot and find another solution.
Yeah. When Ben said learn fast, I mean, the other side of that coin is fail fast, right?
Yeah.
And
love failure.
Yeah. It's really important to, develop that thick skin against failure, but it's also important to recognize that I think a lot of times people take the fail fast thing and they corrupt it a little bit into like, it's okay to cut corners and it's okay to like make sloppy decisions and stuff like that. What I tell my team is fail fast doesn't mean the goal is to fail. It means that the goal is to learn, and oftentimes, the quickest way to learn is to fail. I don't care if we have failures. We can have as many failures as we need to, as long as each one of those failures, we're learning something new, and then we're changing the parameters the next time through so that we're not just learning the same mistake, not making the same mistake over and over again, and learning the same thing.
I think there's so many tools to like spin up a landing page, run a couple ads, look at your click-through rate, and like if it's below 2%, okay, you don't have the right idea. But I think, like you're saying, fail fast doesn't mean find the best landing page and conversion. It means what is the right way to validate that this is something someone wants or not.
Yeah.
Find that the fastest you can. It doesn't mean do it the quick and dirty way. But no, I understand. I 100% agree with what you're saying, that there should be a learning out of every experiment, every A/B test, like you're saying, right? There should be some learning. Hey, you optimize this funnel. Okay, they're not converting. Why are they not converting? Did you learn something out of that or not?
Yeah, exactly.
If you just ran a test, they're not converting, and now you don't know anything more, you wasted both the time of the test, you wasted engineering resources, and now you don't even know how to make another good test because
you just have to throw another dart in the dark. Yeah.
How are you guys preparing for the long haul journey of building a hardware software company And I know you said you're in phase 1. I know you probably have a lot of phases. I don't know off the top of how many clients you have actually built out for, but this is traditionally a much longer cycle of building a company. And I keep referencing SaaS just because that's what I know, but SaaS tech world, shorter cycles, they're easier to exit out of. You can find sales faster, acquisitions faster. My assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, is in this space, your journey is probably going to be 5, 10, 15 years and a much longer journey. How are you guys prepping for that? What's the plan? How are you guys going about that?
One aspect of that is that the company itself has a rather long view on its usefulness to society. So we're very much not a company that's looking to get built up in 2 years, have an exit, go live on an island or whatever the people in those news articles end up doing with that money. This is to improve the human condition by making deliveries way better, faster and decarbonized, decentralized. And so when you have a mission that's that big and impactful, it helps you hire the right people and think about things, plan the right way to be in it for a longer period of time. And if done correctly, this will be my last job that I will have for decades, because last company, I don't know if I need to be CEO that whole time, but like this company is going to build enough important things that I would like to just play in that space for the rest of my career.
Makes sense.
And that helps me make decisions and plan for longer. That's probably too philosophical. Dylan, give a more practical answer.
I think it's reflected in our mission, right? If our mission was optimize a great mission, and a mission that we both actually have passion for, that we could have chosen would have been something along the lines of automating manufacturing to return manufacturing to the US. That's something that we both have passion for. It is a goal that we participate in, but it's not the mission, right? The mission is to decarbonize the transportation of goods. Right now, we're building this system. We hope that there's a phase 2 and a phase 3 where we get to the point where we have this as a new form of infrastructure that's citywide. But there might be a problem beyond that where it's the biggest, challenge in decarbonizing the transportation of goods. We could be still trying to accomplish that same mission 20 years from now. Probably not us, right?
Exactly.
And that's the other piece of this, which is that you have to be realistic as a founder. It really is anyone participating in an early stage company about what the long-term picture is. And so for us, we talked about this even before we ever hired anyone or raised any money, which was, I hope that I'm not CTO sometime in hopefully like the next few years. Not because I don't think I could do the job or whatever. Like, I hope I could grow into that, but realistically, I just won't be the right person to do that job for the company at that point in time. And so setting everything up and trying to, as much as you can, take the ego out of it and say, we're trying to accomplish this goal. How do we set the company up best to accomplish that goal? Not how do I set myself up? How do I see the most success or whatever?
Sense. Quick tangent. You mentioned decarbonizing a couple times. How do you guys make decisions on your day-to-day? Because, and this is probably not the best analogy, but like Tesla's been given shit before of like, oh, hey, you're trying to do EV, but all your electricity comes from carbon emitting sources of...
Yeah, dirty grid, man.
But like similar to this, if your goal is to decarbonize the logistics supply chain, are you guys constantly ensuring that that's part of your build process and process as well? Or is that down the line, or do you not look at that right now? Or, because I'm assuming that probably hinders a lot of your supply chain and your build process and your timeline on things, if you're also worried about making sure your supply chain is carbon neutral or zero carbon supply chain.
Absolutely. Everything we buy, half of the vehicles that our team drives, if you really wanted to go through and add up the carbon footprint of building the product that we build today, it has one for sure.
Yeah.
It's something that we think about. We're so early right now that we, going back to earlier, right? We have to kind of pick and choose the right battles.
Yeah.
But it is something that we keep an eye on. But I think the other thing is that, like, nothing operates in a vacuum. We might incur some carbon cost to getting the company to the point where it's scalable and we can deploy. We use a high density polypropylene tube. It's plastic. It's a hydrocarbon based product that comes from processing oils. But if you look at the broader landscape of the cost that we incur as a society to move stuff around,
makes sense.
That's a much bigger contributor to carbon footprint in everyone's lives than some of the products that we're choosing to use and leverage. There's also the people that we choose to partner with. Right now, we're talking to a company that's in the power transmission business, the utility company in the power transmission business. And their big hook is connecting clean solar farms, wind farms, clean energy production to, long distances to urban areas. And so by partnering with people like that, we open up new avenues to say, actually, we leverage the power that they make available to charge our robots. And, that lowers the overall carbon footprint, et cetera. So we're definitely aware of it and cognizant of it. We have to make realistic trade-offs today, but as long as we keep track of it and don't let the company lose sight of that goal, right? I think net benefit over the long term will be positive.
To bring it back specifically to the Tesla criticism is we built out the model, and if we go off renewable energy, we reduce carbon emissions by 100%. But if we pull from a coal-sourced grid, then we reduce carbon emissions by 96%. Either way, moving the needle very much in the right way.
100%.
Similar to EVs, if you look at the math as it nets out, EVs are still a step in the right direction.
100%.
But you have to make the trade-offs of are you not going to install anywhere that doesn't have electricity from renewable sources? And it's a lot of those sites that we're looking at don't have that yet. So we have to make that trade-off.
Yeah.
But understanding the whole system, like Dylan said, and knowingly making those trade-offs as you work your way towards that goal is the important part.
And I think it's also a long tail effect, right? As every piece of it starts thinking about decarbonization and sustainability and everything, over time, it'll get to that point. I think it's very difficult for everyone to be like, hey, I'm only going to operate in a carbon neutral environment, because then nothing's ever going to become carbon neutral if everyone operates with that same arrangement of, well, hey, I'm not going to work here if you use carbon-based fuels or whatever, right? But no, I think it's a step in the right direction. I was just curious from a point of view of, does it make your job harder in making decisions for supply chain and logistics and building stuff out and how you go do your operations?
Actually, Ben was at a Earth Day related conference last week.
EarthX, so rad.
Yeah. And he shared something with us, maybe it was with me, I don't remember who he shared it with specifically, but that I think is really, apropos to this conversation, which is that he was saying, this experience changed how I think about working with oil companies. Traditionally, we've just said, basically, don't want to deal with you guys. We don't want to be a part of that. But fundamentally, our product lowers carbon emissions. And so if an energy company, an oil company comes to us and says, we have an application where we can replace a truck that uses diesel with your product, why wouldn't we help them become, have less of a, it's we shouldn't cut off our nose to spite our face, right? If those opportunities come along, now if they were I don't know, I'm having a hard time coming up with a really bad example, if they were well, we're going to use it to move dead babies or something, right? Then maybe that's a scenario that we would say, maybe we don't want to do it. But, it's fundamentally having an eye on that long game and saying, yeah, you may make decisions that at first glance in isolation seem like they're driven by something other than the mission, but ultimately you keep that mission in mind, you'll get there.
Makes sense.
I'm calling it right now. Someone listening to this podcast works at a big oil company and they have an abandoned pipeline that they want to retrofit to move things with zero carbon emissions with Tubular Network. And they're going to find out because of this. Just putting that out in the world.
I want half a point for her. One last question about co-founder dynamic. How do you guys make decisions? Are there ever arguments? Is it a clear line of distinction between what's your territory versus what's yours? Or how does that dynamic work between you guys?
I think as much as possible, we try to have like who owns the decision and then respect the other's opinion on anything with the company. I mean, we co-founded it. And so if there's any business or marketing or otherwise decision that I'm making, he's welcome to criticize it profusely. And has saved me from making some of the dumber mistakes. So thank you. And I think within the company, building a culture of respectfully challenging and disagreeing well.
Yeah.
I mean, that goes back to how we met and why I liked working with Dylan so much is we disagreed well. I had this idea for a test. He respectfully told me how dumb that idea was in certain ways, right? He didn't just say, oh, that's dumb. He was like, that way of testing, it's not going to produce a clean test, and so your results are going to be worthless. I would recommend something like this. And that kind of disagreeing well is fundamental to good founder dynamics and really anyone you hire on.
I mean, I think the disagreeing well is the key. And, I think in a lot of ways, well, actually, I think statistically we are kind of your typical startup founders. Like, as far as I understand, like actually being in your like mid to late 30s and having a family and stuff is more common than you see, again, 100%. The 25-year-old that has the $100 million exit or whatever.
Yeah.
But,
the average age of an entrepreneur is like 36 or 37.
Ding, ding.
Yeah. So I'm the old man here, but that's okay. But my point is that like, there's some things that you learn when you have a family and you've just kind of been around for a few decades and stuff around like the battles that you choose and how to be humble and recognize what's your opinion versus what's important and stuff like that. And I think that, being able to sit down and say, Ben, you're working on this thing and I have my own opinions, but my opinions aren't necessarily any more valid or bring any more likelihood of success. So maybe I'll share them and I'll say, hey, just my opinion here, just the way that I would think about this or do this or whatever. Here's the X, Y, and Z, take it or leave it. Or sometimes you just don't say anything because you're like, I don't want to muddy the waters. And being able to do that with the team, Ben has a really great way of doing this where he kind of like has stuff broken out into this sort of tier system where it's like edict, like something that has to happen, strong suggestion, something that he feels passionately needs to happen, moderate suggestion, something that he maybe has some passion for, but doesn't really care. And then like just shit he's making up off the top of his head, right? And that's not how he lays the categories out, but that's how I think about it. And so he'll just kind of do this thing, right, where he'll be talking to me or the team or whatever and be like, this is like, this category thing, here it is. And that's really helpful because in a founder relationship, but also when you're leading a team, it's important to sort of set that, this is something I really care about. And so I think it's important that you hear me and have a good reason to not take my feedback. But this other thing is something I really don't care about. I'm literally just making it up on the spot. So like, you can totally trash it and I will have no attachment to it whatsoever. And that distinction is really important.
I like it. Cool. I like to do a couple questions at the end of every interview. What is your guys' tech or startup stack? What do you guys use to run the company?
Yeah, we use ROS, the robot operating system, is our primary software framework for the robots. We use kind of a hodgepodge of some Python and Golang for intermediate tier of software that sort of the systems that the robot interacts directly with. We use like Elasticsearch and some other stuff for log aggregation.
We use Discord for communications.
We use Discord for communications, which is like, I love Discord and I hate Discord every day.
I feel like Discord the UI is not the best for like productive conversations, but I've heard both sides of the conversation.
Yeah.
It's not as structured as Slack.
Yeah.
It tries to be, but it's not meant for that audience.
Right.
But,
and you don't own the users.
Yeah.
Which sounds weird, but like in a corporate Slack environment, you get to commission every single seat and every single user where you don't in Discord, which is actually one of the reasons I chose it over Slack. Was it's important to me from a employee experience perspective that the connections that people make at work can outlive their life at the company. So when someone leaves, if they've made a connection with someone on Discord, they keep that connection, right? They're not just like suddenly cut off. I don't know. That's most of our technology. I could get down into the hardware, but that gets real.
No, and any ticket management, any operationally.
We use Trello, sort of. We don't use it as well as we should. We're trying to get better. And we are Atlassian, like we have Confluence for the wiki. And
interesting that you have Atlassian and not Jira.
Trello.
Confluence, not Jira, but Trello.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, it's Atlassian getting us with the freemium thing. That's what it is. They were like, hey, guess what? You have a free Confluence page.
Yeah.
And I was like, sweet, we need that. And soon they're going to come and be like, you owe us a lot of money. And I'm gonna be like, well, I guess I'm going to pay it.
Somewhat related and really good advice for entrepreneurs is like our advisor stack. Like we've built an incredible team of advisors who really care about what we're building, very mission aligned. But the two best advisors, by probably an order of magnitude, would be our spouses. Yeah. And the reason that Dylan makes HR choices, sorry if I'm...
No. You're on track.
Okay, yeah. It's like, I hope I'm not going off out here. The reason he makes such great HR choices is because he's got this mentor. His wife is incredible at HR. She thinks about things in ways that blows my mind and just really does the right thing by the right people.
Does she have advisor equity or?
She's got spouse equity. I'd say with my wife, she's a marketing and public relations genius. She's recently gotten into product at a fitness tech company. And it's funny because I was in product marketing, then she got into product, I got into product, she got into product, and she's better at every step than me. And so I think next is startup world, and I guess that's how I'll retire is through her. But she's brilliant, and they spend a lot of time thinking about our company and how to make it better, but also have a lot of patience with us.
Nice.
I'm making some assumptions here, but a lot of patience with us and giving us some of the best advice we've gotten. So as an entrepreneur, if you have a significant other or a spouse and they care about what you care about, listen to them. They've got some of the best advice you can get.
It's funny you said that because my next question is going to be, what's your guys' support system? But I guess we already answered that.
Oh, we've got multiple levels of that.
Definitely, I think our families are number one in that list. I'm actually pretty bad, but like if I didn't have my wife, I would just be like a lonely man on an island because I'm not particularly good at like asking for help, but I'm really fortunate that I have a wife that just sort of understands when I need it and gives it to me. But outside of family, we do have a set of mentors that have been super valuable to us. It's really tempting to like believe everything that everyone tells you, but then if you ask 10 people, you get 10 different 100%. Perspectives. And so I think it's important to have a good number of people, right? If you have one person that you're like, this person was successful, so I trust everything they say, and I'm just going to do everything they say, you're just going to try to replicate their success, which isn't going to be successful.
Also, it's very easy for someone to give advice.
Yes.
From a position of like, I have zero risk in the situation.
Yes.
You should go do X. I'm like, but like, I can't.
Yeah.
I 100% agree that at the end of the day, it is your decision and your opinion, and every piece of advice you get should be an input into what your end decision is, but not you told me to do X, let me just go do X, right?
Yeah. So if you're a founder or you're starting on that journey and you have those like one or two trusted people, that's great. Keep them, but go find 10 others who are willing to have a 30-minute phone call with you once or twice a month, where you can just bring them a half dozen questions, shoot them an email before the meeting and say, this is the stuff I'd love your feedback on. And then just aggregate all that feedback.
I do this with other founders, and we have a monthly 30 or 60 minute meeting, and often there are pointed topics that we're trying to discuss, but it also devolves into like, listen to this crazy stuff. It's fundraising, or this supplier or this employee or whatever. And it's just like the ability to level with somebody who's been through that journey or is going through that journey. One of the richest grounds for advice that I found.
This is the third or fourth time I've done a startup, by far the farthest I've ever made it. And I always had this perspective, like before this time around, all of the like, oh, it's so hard and, hemming and hawing and stuff that you hear about founding a company. was sort of, bullshit, just buck up, you're getting to follow your dream or whatever. This is the first time where I've lived it in a way that's talking to other people who have been through that particular hell is super valuable, because there's just not a lot of people in the world that have that specific context.
100%.
I imagine while I wouldn't say that these two groups are equal, I imagine in a lot of ways it's like the sort of camaraderie that, maybe soldiers go through, not likening being a startup founder to the hell that soldiers go through. But like when you have a group of people that have all kind of gone through a similar type of trauma, in the military, one of the terms that's used is trauma bonding, right? You have a unique perspective and a unique ability to empathize with what other people who are going through that kind of thing.
I do this segment where I ask every guest a last question for a future guest. So your guys' question, and I'm going to ask you guys to give me one each, but your guys' question is, what is it that makes you fundamentally human?
Oh.
And it can't be what you do. Like, it can't be your job and like your...
God, I hope that wouldn't be what would make you fundamentally human. There's a cop-out answer, which is like, my son and my family, right? I don't say it's a cop-out issue or cop-out answer because like it's not true, but it kind of feels like a cop-out answer because, it's like the obvious as a dad, of course I'm going to say my son. But maybe there's like a more generic answer, which is like how we connect with the people that we love. And I think it's important context for founders, right? Is like, it's really easy to just let everything else in your life go and just pour yourself into a business. And it feels like the right thing to do, right? Mm-hmm. It feels like what's necessary. But I think that gives you a distorted perspective on the world, which doesn't benefit your business. I don't know that it's worth it. Like, I don't know that killing yourself, even if you do have that unicorn exit one day, I don't know that it's worth killing yourself to get there.
100%.
So I would say, just like how you connect with the people that you love.
Damn, that's good. I'm going to go with to change and to grow is what fundamentally makes me or humans human. I've got a 7-week-old and a 2.5-year-old, and watching them change so fast and grow so fast, it's like seeing a microcosm of what I'm going through as a entrepreneur. This is somebody who you'd think after, I don't know, a decade in his career, maybe more than a decade. Oh, wow. Don't need to think about that. I've found my ways.
More than a decade, bro.
Yeah. Okay. Well, more than almost 2 decades into my career that I'm kind of stuck in my ways, but I'm learning and changing quickly and growing. And a lot of it looks just as hard as it does for the little ones that are in my household. And then when you think about humanity on a broad scale, what we're asking them to do is put new tubes in the ground to totally change how things move. And it's a lot of that same journey. What needs to be better and how can we do it? And then making that journey as painful and glorious as it is, how to make that journey. So I think that's what makes us human.
I like that. What's your guys' question for my future guests?
Something that I've been struggling with lately, and I maybe have sort of alluded to it a couple times, is the burnout piece, right? How do you keep a passion project, which I think is why most founders get into what they get into? How do you keep a startup being a passion as opposed to it becoming a noose around your neck? How do you find that balance?
That is a very good question. Let me go with that one.
You only get one.
That works. Thanks for coming on, guys. That's all the questions I had for you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Where can listeners find you? What do you want to plug? And we'll link everything in show notes and everything, but...
Our website is tubular.network. So .network is the domain, like .com. It's .network. So that's easy, tubular.network. And then we're pretty active on LinkedIn. Come down to Austin. Let us know you're coming. You can come check out the robots. We're with the ACC Highland. And so that's why at the beginning of this session, I realized it was in person, and I was able to get over here because, we're around here.
Look us up online. Find us on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate the time. We'll link everything, try to get some cool graphics from you to insert throughout the video. But thanks for coming on, guys.
Yeah,
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into Funds and Founders. If you're a local Austin founder, a venture capitalist, or just someone who's building and in the middle of their journey and would like to be featured on an upcoming episode, submit your guest pitch to abhinavsinha.podcast@gmail.com. If you have a founder-specific event you'd like to promote on the podcast, you can also reach out to me. If you want to continue to get support through your founder journey, hit the follow button and I'll see you in the next episode.